Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Real Time Training, and this is part 3 in the inside look of Fusion Youth Ministry. And so if you're one of our Fusion staff members or a potential Fusion team member, then watch along, and this is for you, and it's also for a few of our other friends there out there in the youth ministry community who are looking for some inside tips on programming and things like that. And so we welcome both of you to this episode, which talks about programming and how we do our programming here at Fusion Youth Ministry. So if you look at the what you're paid for, which you maybe have to squint at your paycheck, I'm sure some of you, and says, oh, those really numbers, or did somebody just scribble something there? But if you look at what you're actually paid for, if you were to break down all your responsibilities and things like that, I can tell you what you're not paid for, or what I'm not paid for either, for that matter. But we're not paid to preach, we're not paid to disciple, or pray, or love, or any of those things, because those are all things we would do as believers anyway, wouldn't we? We would do those things whether anybody paid us to do them or not. And some of you are volunteers, and so you're literally not getting paid to do those things. So you would do those anyway because you do love the kids, or you love your church, and you want to see move forward and accomplish great things. I think what most pastors are looking for are whether or not a youth pastor can put together a cohesive plan of programming that will encourage kids in their faith and have them move forward in their faith, and obviously do those things that the church, whatever the church's goals are, or principles or purposes or whatever those are. Can a youth pastor execute those things? And so today we want to talk about it. I'm going to show you a little bit about how we do our purposes, and we operate on a process called the quad. Now, my pastor loves to call it the pillars, but I like cooler terms than that, so I call them the quad. And so the quad are really simple. There are four objectives or purposes or goals or principles, or whichever way you'd like to say that. They're real simple, and they're evangelism, community and fellowship, discipleship, and worship. And so those are our four main things. That it's the grid, it's the template by which all activities and events pass through, because we don't really do a lot of things without purpose. We try to make sure we're doing things on purpose, and that each event has a purpose. And so the quad helps us filter those things and gives us a good tracking of how each of those are being planned, and do we have specific goals for each of those and things like that. And so we use that to kind of start off the process of our fall planning or summer planning, or whichever season we happen to be in, and we try to do that. And so in working through that, let me give you just how we describe our terms or things like that. They're just like everybody else's, I imagine, how you term that. But evangelism for us is giving students an opportunity to share the gospel with their friends. Now, whether that's them inviting them to church, or going on an outing with us, or things like that. Evangelism can happen anywhere. Students can do this all the time. We encourage our kids to build relationships, make friends with people, so forth and so on, just like many of you do. And we invite them to come in, and eventually they're going to share the gospel with them. And that's the good news about who Jesus is, and the hope of Jesus for their lives. And so they're with them. I get to see them a whole 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week at most. And then these guys spend the rest of the time, their friends spend time with them. So we are always encouraging them and helping them and training them to be able to share their own story with their friends. So evangelism is just an opportunity that we give kids and give our students a chance to share their story, or to share Jesus with them, with their friends. The second thing is community. And community is basically any event that we have, big or small, which presses kids together to where they have to get to know each other a little bit better. So that may be community, just maybe a small outing with 5 or 6 people in a car. It could be just meeting after youth with a couple of kids, or we have a breakfast Bible study, let's say, with just a couple of kids there. Or it may be something bigger. It may be a big game night, or it may be something like that, which gets these kids together and moving in a different direction. But they do have to be able to move together, and so that we press and push them together so they can better get to know each other. Discipleship is basically, for us, it's giving kids the opportunity to do what they've been taught. Discipleship is less about learning or learning the facts, just the learning part, but is also the doing. And like we said in our last episode, we create opportunities for kids to do the things and have adults come along and facilitate with them to do the things that they're being taught to do, whether that's prayer, whether that's evangelism, whether that's sharing your testimony, whatever that is. That's part of the discipleship process for us. The last thing is worship, and worship is a broad term in the sense of not just singing, but giving, and even play in some cases, because we come together in worship to lift up Jesus. And if we can lift up Jesus through play, through song, through giving, through the sharing of our talents and abilities, I believe that honors the Lord. I believe that's very, very much New Testament church in that regard, because I think that's what Paul was talking about, everybody being a part of the body. Everybody's not an ear in our youth ministries. They're not just there to listen, but they're there to do and to give and to share of who Christ is in their life. And so we want to help facilitate that in their lives. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little closer look at our programming through our quad. So let's take a look at the sheet there, and you'll see how we do our programming for our youth ministry. Well, you can see from our quad here that we have a lot of activities and things like that are going on. And so let's take a look at evangelism real quick. You notice that we have a See at the Pole rally, and if you don't know what See at the Pole is a global event where kids gather their flagpole on September 26th, early in the morning, to gather on their flagpoles and pray with one another, their schools, for their administration, for their nation, and things like that. And so we're going to be participating in that and then going to a rally at another church. You can see there fifth quarter, and fifth quarters after the football games. We usually do one of those in a quarter. Then we have Harvest Festival, which a lot of churches do. And Harvest Festival is basically, a big, trunk or treat or activities and things like that. And then, of course, there's some Wednesday nights where we focus solely on an event or an activity for kids to be able to bring their friends to that. And when we're planning those things, you notice there's not a ton of them, but in your filling out your quad, as you're looking at what you're asking your students to do, you should always ask and say, okay, what's doable for our group? If you have a group of 5 kids or 10 kids, or if you have whatever amount you may have, you have to ask yourself whether or not it's doable. It's not really based on how much faith you have. It's really based upon what can your group legitimately do? What can it do in the scale and the scope of what that event can do? So I want to encourage you with those, because an evangelism does not always have to be a huge event. It just has to be an event where the gospel is shared, and that's what the evangelism is. So whether that's training your kids to do it, or whether that's you doing it yourself, whatever that is, just to make sure that an evangelism event is not just to have knowledge of the church, but have knowledge of who Christ is. Moving over there to community and fellowship, we've had a young adult luncheon in Fuego, which is a music festival, Youth Quake, another music festival, UAB Faith and Family Night. Now, when we're planning these things, we think community fellowship. Well, community fellowship also involves the family, and not just kids, but involves anybody in your church. So UAB Faith and Family Night, we hope to get a lot of parents out for that and be a part of that. Then we have a hayride bonfire at somebody's house. And then we have Christmas party, which we don't know exactly what house we're going to have it at, but we are going to have it. It's even possible we may even do a lock-in. I know, shudder the thought, right? Moving over to discipleship, you notice that we have 2 things under there, 2 events, not necessarily programs as much as channels of discipleship. And one is nursing home ministry, where our kids show up and sing and visit with some of the residents there of the home. And then, of course, Sunday school, where the learning, some of that learning process does happen. But discipleship, once again, is also based on our projects. And so when our kids come forth and have projects, that's what we do with our latter 45 minutes of time within our Wednesday nights. And then we move over to worship. In worship, we have Hillsong Concert, which is also a community fellowship type of event. A lot of these will bleed over. They're not just individual events. You can have evangelism at a community fellowship event. You can have evangelism and discipleship. You can have worship at your evangelism. You can, all these different things. So don't get hung up on making something solely something else. I mean, it's just got to be just this, but there's multiple things that happen within that. But if you look, we have Hillsong Concert, which is also a church-wide event. We have our Wednesday nights, which we focus on worship quite a bit. And then Fine Arts and Talent Night, which I think is part of Worship because we're giving kids an opportunity to share their gifts within a theme. Like our theme this time is going to be sharing your faith or evangelism or the lost. And then they will do something. It could be art, it could be a song, it could be a skit, it could be anything they do as long as it fits within the theme of that night. So now that you've seen how we do it, I have provided for you a template of your own, kind of a blank sheet there, and maybe you could go through with you, some of your leaders and maybe some of your students about some of the activities and things and say, now where would these go? Where would this activity go? And where would this go? And if they come up with an idea, they say, well, okay, well, what quad does that belong in? And so as you begin to see the picture, something you may notice about that is, at least as far as my quad goes, it's very balanced in the sense that I think I should have X amount of activities and certain things because I always want our kids sharing the gospel. I always want them to be in community. I always want them to be worshiping. I always want them in the discipleship mode. And kids are always coming in your program at different points and different, guests and things like that. And so just because a kid misses one thing, they may get to do another. So on average, we try to hit all 4 of these quads once a month. So you can take your quad, you can print it off, get with your kids or get with your adult leaders or your volunteers or your pastor and just sit down and say, hey, how can we plan this to where we do a balanced job of programming? And there may be some cases where you have to lean heavily on evangelism, or you may spend a whole semester on evangelism. I don't know, but I do know that if you look at your quad and if you're not seeing the results that you really want to see, it's best to check the program and say, okay, well, how many events did we have? If we don't see people making decisions for Christ, it could be because you didn't have enough emphasis on evangelism and sharing the faith and sharing Christ with people. If you don't see your group growing, that may be another reason why, because you may not be executing evangelism strategies or whatever. So you look there and say, well, we only had one event for evangelism. That could be a problem if you're trying to grow your youth group. You say our kids aren't feeling tight together. Well, look at your community. Is there other community events that you should program in there, or whether or not you should challenge your adults just or yourself to get individually and get groups of kids together, 4 or 5 together, to go eat or do things like that. But either way, you can always use it as a litmus test. It could be worship, it could be discipleship. How are our kids turning out and things like that at the end of the day. Are kids growing in their faith? And you can look by your activities and look by your programming schedule whether or not you're accomplishing what you had really set out to do. Which brings me to our next part here, which is really about just 5 steps. If I can just offer 5 tips, if you will, on programming. Number 1, I'd start with the end in mind. What kind of student do you want at the end of a month or 6 months or a year or by the time they graduate? If you'll start with the end in mind concerning your programming, on what kind of disciple you want to have, what kind of follower of Jesus would you like to see as far as your end. Now, parents have to take their responsibility. We have to take our responsibility in the programs that we offer, that we're offering something that is increasing their faith and increasing their cognitive ability to follow Jesus, and increasing their faith to follow Jesus. And so when we look at the quad and look at those things, we can say, look, are we starting with the end in mind? That we want a student to be A, B, and C. And does the quad reflect A, B, and C? And if it doesn't, well, change the quad, change the programming in those areas, and more emphasis here, less emphasis here, however you choose to do that. But always start with the end in mind. Number 2 is we work the plan until the plan works. You see, when you develop a plan or a program or things like that, it takes time. It takes time, whether it's a Wednesday night program, a Sunday morning program, a Sunday night program, an off night program, whatever that is, you have to give that program enough time to work so that you can be able to gauge it, study it, to be able to decide whether it's successful or not, to decide whether or not you're meeting your goals or not. So whatever you do your program and do it for a period of time. Some things have a shelf life. There are some things that you can look at and go, well, we need to cut that out. That's not really doing what it's supposed to do anymore. Or we need to add something new or fresh. So however and there's obviously big programming scales, like we want to, change, our, Wednesday night Bible study to Thursday night, or Thursday night to Sunday night. And those are really big programming changes that you have to look at and say, well, is this doing what we're supposed to do? And are we going to be more effective if we do it this way? But always work your plan until the plan works, or until you reach just a dead end We say, look, we've done everything we can do. We've tried everything we can try on this particular area or this particular program, and it's not working out the way we want. Then you got to go back and step back, and you have to punt and figure it out from there, which then leads to number three. Number three is, if you're going to change the program, do it in a group setting. Don't go back to your lab, your office, your computer, and start Googling and saying the secret youth ministry plans, and decide that this is going to be a new program or latest youth ministry model. And don't do that, because and you say, well, now we're going to do this. Well, let me tell you what, you'll get your kids dizzy, you'll get your adults dizzy, and then you'll make your pastor dizzy, and then he'll forget that you work where you work. So you might want to just do it in a group setting. Do it with your adult volunteers. Do it with your pastor. Sit down and say, look, we want to try something new. We want to experiment with something. Can we try this for a month? Can we try that for a month? And it's all in the program, and it's all in the spirit in which you do that programming. Too many youth pastors program out of fear. I got to get my numbers up. I got to do this. And I got to, and that's all, unfortunately, all too true. But I would encourage you, take a step back from that, from the ledge, if you will, and don't panic. Go back to the drawing board and get with a group of people and says, guys, and if, by the way, if your plans fail, it's probably a good idea to say, you know what, that didn't work. Don't try to blame anybody else for the program but you, okay? If you're getting paid for anything, you're getting paid for that. So you got to own what you got to own and say, you know what, that was my idea. I pushed it forward. I made you guys do it, and it didn't work out. Own your mistake and say, that didn't work. That's my fault. And so go ahead and get with your group of people, own up to what you can own up, everybody being responsible for what they can be responsible for, and then moving on ahead from there. But do it as a group. Number 4 is executing the model takes time. So whatever model you have to ask yourself, if we're going to move to this model, is there training needs to be done? Does there need to be what is our time of build? In other words, to get kids to understand it, to buy into it, to change it if they want to. It takes time to execute, and so you got to have a good, in your planning and your program and things like that. You got to ask, when are we going to execute? Setting a date for this thing and say, we're going to do it here. We're going to work in this way. And how many weeks do we need for that program to work or that event to work? And you have to set yourself up to give yourself enough time to make changes along the way. We're experiencing that as well. I planned a bunch of stuff for our, for September that are just not going to happen because our building's not ready. We can't get into our room, and there are certain events that don't. In the room that I'm currently in, which is 30 by 30, some events don't go off very well in a 30. A fifth quarter does not do well in a 30 by 30. It's just a little cramped with the amount of kids that we'd want to see come. And so I'm having to punt on some things, change some plans around, and to change the programming in that regard. And so I have to let parents know, and I have to, it's about we're doing a big See at the Pole rally, and that was going to be a big deal, and we've had to move that for the same reason. So, we've had to just move some things around, but we have to give ourselves enough time to make those changes, and we can't make changes and turn on a dime because people's brains just don't work that way. And so we have to be able to be flexible and be able to work with other people and do those kind of things. So it takes time to execute the model that you really want to do and decide whether or not it's going to work the way you want it to work. And the final thing is this. Don't throw the model away, tweak it. Tweaking is the key. The program may be able to be salvaged or worked out if you can tweak it, and that may be something like a time issue. That could be the person that's leading that program. That's a change of leadership you want to make. Certain things will thrive in a better atmosphere by just tweaking things. It could be the music you're using. It could be anything. It could be a personnel change. It could be a time change. It could be a room change and just shifting the room around. It could be the room that you're meeting in. It could be the location. There are several different things you need to look at. And so before you take the model and throw it away and say, well, that didn't work, look at your model. Look at the tweaks you can make to that. And look at it in those areas of leadership or room or whatever that is for you. Just be able to look at those things and say, okay, let's fall back a little bit and don't throw this thing away. I would try, like I said, any model, I would do it through a semester or through a month or through a couple of months so you can be able to judge and grade what it is, okay? And so those are the tips of how we do programming here, a little insight into the mind of Fusion Youth Ministry. Thank you for joining us. There's a bunch of other resources you can find right here at this link right here. And you go to there. It's one of my Squidoo sites, and it has some more thoughts and ideas on programming and youth programming, I hope that you'll visit it. I hope that you will go ahead and, I believe on this side, and go ahead and subscribe somewhere up here to this channel where we'll be posting more youth worker training videos. And so I thank you for your time for real-time training today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.